and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Hadley Gamble.
Everybody, and welcome once again to GlobeTech 2.0. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the Chief International Anchor for IMI. And this morning, we're going to kick off by talking about, in very realistic terms, what are the actual prospects for peace at this point? Russia's invasion of Ukraine over 3 years ago, causing devastating damage and loss of life, but also raising real questions about the future of the European and transatlantic alliance. And now with U.S. President Donald Trump sitting in the White House, we need to have some hard and difficult conversations about that. I want to welcome my star-studded panel, His Excellency Jan Lipavský, Andrii Sybiha as well, Anna Tinca, and Kurt Volker, along with Benjamin Haddad, who's in the audience. Welcome to the stage. And once again, we want this to be as honest a conversation as possible because we're looking for pragmatic solutions. You also have the ability, using Silo, to open up your tablets or your phones and ask us some questions in real time. But first, I'd like to get a show of hands in this room. Who today actually believes that U.S. President Donald Trump can deliver on his promise of peace in Ukraine? Raise your hand.
We believe.
My first question, and just for those who are watching the streaming, those of you in the audience watching the streaming version of our discussion, there were no hands raised in this room. Foreign Minister, why do you still believe that to be the case?
You see, first of all, let me join to happy birthday greetings addressing to GlobeSec. We mark 20 years of this great forum, a really important platform for the exchange of views. So bravo to the organizers, and really happy and pleased to have an opportunity to attend this forum, especially now. And for me, as a minister of the country which is in war, is really important. That's why I'm here. Second point, you can't imagine how I strongly dream, or all of us dream, that Ukraine will not be a topic or issue of discussions during probably all the forums all over the world. It means how it is important to win the peace, how it is important to achieve long-lasting, comprehensive peace for Ukraine. That's why we welcome efforts of the President Trump. We do really believe that we have a chance to achieve peace, to achieve ceasefire this year. We want to end this war this year, and we do really have a chance to speed up our peace efforts. By the way, next week will be exactly 100 days when Ukraine accepted full unconditional ceasefire. It was a proposal of American side, it was a proposal of President Trump, and we are ready to move forward. The most fundamental step on our efforts to achieve long-lasting peace, just peace, is ceasefire. Unconditional full ceasefire, and we need to pressure Russia to say unconditional yes for ceasefire. And after this, we have a chance to speed up our peace efforts and to start negotiations on broader peace agreement or arrangements.
And just to follow on to that, is Donald Trump essential to getting peace?
Of course. So the recipe is very simple. Leadership and engagement of the U.S. side to raise the price for Russia to continue the war. I mean sanctions, isolation, frozen assets, and of course the third point, to strengthen Ukraine deterrence package.
I want to ask America's former ambassador to NATO, as well as U.S. representative to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, this question. Is Donald Trump essential to peace with Russia?
Well, first off, I didn't raise my hand. So I don't think we're going to have peace. I do agree with the minister. I think we may have a ceasefire. And what it will take to get to a ceasefire is squeezing Putin's finances. So he has a very hard time keeping the Russian state afloat and conducting this war if he doesn't have revenue. So we really have to squeeze that. And we have to make sure that Ukraine has a continued supply of weapons and ammunition, including from the United States. It can be on a paid-for basis, not a taxpayer-funded basis. And there, I think the U.S. role, Donald Trump, is essential to make sure that that is allowed to go forward, that is being sold. But I don't believe there's going to be any peace in Ukraine for the simple reason that Vladimir Putin has maximalist objectives about the extermination of Ukraine as a sovereign state and as a people and national identity. And he's not going to change. So what we're going to end up with is the possibility of a ceasefire and then the need to basically man the barricades, prevent future Russian attacks, and strengthen Ukraine as much and as quickly as possible while we watch Putin try to rebuild on his side. No one's going to be trying to attack Russia and defeat Moscow, but we do have to be prepared to have an uneasy standoff over occupied Ukraine for a long time.
Do you believe this latest package of sanctions goes far enough?
The ones that are in the Senate right now and have not yet been passed, yes, I think that they will finally start to do the right thing. People in this room would remember that for the first 3 years of the war, the Biden administration had sanctions in name and then exemptions to the sanctions, particularly for payments to Russian banks for energy. And they did not want to really squeeze Russian energy supplies, which meant that Putin didn't really face any difficulty. I think this current package that's there, which leaves in place the primary sanctions on Russia, leaves in place the sanctions on the shadow fleet, leaves in place the end of these exemptions, which took place in January, and now adds sanctions on those who would be helping Russia to evade these primary sanctions. So it creates a very strong penalty and deterrent for countries, banks, people who would be trying to evade these sanctions. I think that would be significant, and coupled with an effort to keep global oil prices low, so that would also have an impact on Putin's budget.
Madam Secretary, I wanted to ask you specifically about some comments we heard from NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte. He was essentially saying that in 5 years he believes that Vladimir Putin's Russia could invade Europe. Is that something that in your mind Europe is remotely prepared for?
Thank you very much for this question. I'm also very, very glad to be here. GlobSec is such a landmark event. I think that we are working on it. We should definitely speed up and intensify our efforts. I would agree, nothing we see on the ground, judging Russia by the deeds and not by its words, clearly show that Moscow has not abandoned its objectives. And I would agree with those who say that if we do not stop Putin, Putin will not stop in Ukraine or with Ukraine. So Europe getting better prepared, ready, is of the utmost importance. I think we have started the work. Being realistic, it's going to be a process. It's going to take time and some difficult decisions. But as a neighboring of Ukraine, as a Black Sea country who see firsthand the impact of this war, the regional impact, and also the global impact of what is happening in Ukraine, how high the stakes are, and what is this really about. I think that Europe has really no choice. And again, I think we've done some very good work in keeping united in support of Ukraine, in sanctioning Russia, but now the real test would be our capacity to hold on to these measures, to go for the long haul, and make sure that we keep our unity as Europeans, who need to be involved, because peace in Europe is actually what we are talking about, and also remaining uniting with the US, who I agree has a very important role to play, and the engagement of the US will continue to be extremely important in the months to come.
Benjamin, walk us through, in your mind, this latest round of sanctions coming from Europe. Do they go far enough?
Well, first, let me say as well that I'm very glad to be here at GlobeSec and congratulate my friends Andrii and Thomas Poyar on their awards, very well deserved last night. You know, look at the situation in which we are in today, and I really want to reinforce what was said, especially by Minister Sybiha. More than 3 months ago, President Zelensky clearly agreed to non-conditional ceasefire, to lay the groundwork for diplomacy and for just and lasting peace in Europe. And this is something that's been supported by the United States and Trump administration and by Europeans. We've said for a long time we're going to see divisions in the transatlantic relations on this, and the truth is we're very aligned and convergent on the need for a ceasefire, for diplomacy, and to find the conditions. The one country that's constantly refused to engage seriously in diplomacy and in talks has been Vladimir Putin's Russia. Russia has been escalating on the ground against infrastructure, against military, against civilians in Ukraine, if you look at just the last few days, and it's kept maximalist aims when you hear what it's looking for in Ukraine, and de facto, as Kurt just said, erasing Ukraine as an independent nation. When you talk about neutralization, so depriving Ukrainians of the right to choose freely their alliances and their political path, when you talk about demilitarization for a country that's been invaded repeatedly, when you talk about changing the government, which is only the legitimate right of Ukrainians and certainly not of a foreign invader, we can see that this is not serious. So the only path and the only solution is to increase the pressure on Russia. Continue military support for Ukraine, as we've done in the last few years, and increase it, both from the United States and from Europe, and Europeans are ready to do this, and continue to increase the sanctions and the economic cost on Russia. We've had recently, as you know, the 17th package of sanctions from the European Union, especially extending the sanctions against the shadow fleet that allow Russia to circumvent the sanctions on energy. We have to go further. There's this 18th package that's being prepared right now, which will extend the sanctions on the energy sector, which I think is really key because, as we know, this is still the main resource that Russia is using to fund its war of aggression, lowering the price cap on oil, continuing to straighten the tools against any kind of circumvention, shadow fleet, etc. I agree with what was said about the package in the Senate. I think, and the fact that it's widely supported in a bipartisan way, I think sends a strong message also to Moscow, and we're engaging and talking with US senators on how we can move forward together. You have the Repower EU strategy, which also will allow to completely draw down and go to zero on any kind of import and dependency from of Europeans from Russia. Once again, and I think this is something that is clear to everyone. The only way to get to what we want, which is the end of hostility and a ceasefire, is to really put maximal pressure on Vladimir Putin.
Foreign Minister, to add to that, I mean, we've been talking about this for 3 years, and we're still talking about it. And Vladimir Putin doesn't play our game. He doesn't recognize the rules of the West. In your mind, what is the silver bullet that will get this done and end this war?
I don't think there's a one silver bullet. I think our...
Donald Trump isn't it.
Donald Trump has enormous power of the United States of America. And we have to act in a way that we keep Americans involved as much as possible in European security, through NATO, through other means. And I think it's a fair call from the USA for us Europeans to increase the military spendings. But it will happen gradually, and it has to happen in a controlled manner. So there will not be created any holes in the way how we are secured. So it's not easy discussion, honestly. Those are not easy discussions, but we have to keep Americans aboard as much as possible. You started with a question if or how the peace to Ukraine could be brought, and if it's Donald Trump, definitely he has a lot of power to help to bring ceasefire to reality.
Foreign Minister Sybiha, walk me through this, what we've seen overnight, this attack by Israel on Iran. In your mind, does this weaken the Iran-China-Russia axis?
See, first of all, we are not in the stage or in the phase of the competition of wars, first of all. It is important to prevent escalation and destabilization in the region. It is crucial. And please don't forget that Iran is a country which supplies weaponry to Russia. And this weaponry...
So are you grateful to Israel for taking action?
So Iran is supplying weaponry to Russia. So as I mentioned, it is important to prevent destabilization and to reduce tensions in the region. That's important globally because this destabilization will have an impact and effect on global security. On global security, that's why now returning back to the situation in Ukraine, we need full diplomatic mobilization. That's important, especially right now, and I totally agree with previous speakers that we need additional pressure. We need to apply additional pressure on Russia by strong sanctions. First of all, oil price cap, our understanding, our approach, fair price, $30. Another point, banking system in Russia, including central bank and big regional banks in Russia. It will be really harmful for them. And we understand that Putin, he doesn't have any reasons at this stage to stop the war. We should pressure him, we should, by our collective effort, we should force him to accept ceasefire by applying these sanctions. Now, only sanctions could force him to accept ceasefire. He understands only the language of strength. They didn't change the rhetoric. Istanbul talks or meetings proved they didn't change the rhetoric. Their language is a language of ultimatums and the language of capitulation. Once again, we have this chance to speed up our peace efforts.
Kurt, does an Israeli attack on Iran help Ukraine?
There's a lot of interesting things to think about here, which the answer could be yes or no. And I'd say in the immediate term, what we've seen overnight, I would say no. You have the U.S. response after this Israeli attack basically saying, this wasn't us, we had nothing to do with this, please don't give us terrorist attacks. That's not a very strong message. It's one that seems to have our ally Israel a bit more isolated. And it's one that tells China that we don't want to get involved. So this is not a strong message in the short run. However, this could play out in a way where Israel keeps up the attacks. They've only gone after the nuclear facilities and some of the leadership, but they could keep up these attacks. And if Iran responds directly attacking Israel with substantial conventional military forces, that could force a larger conventional conflict, and it could force the U.S. to become involved directly, which, if it did, would both weaken Iran, meaning they're less capable of helping Russia against Ukraine, and it would also send the opposite message to China, which is we didn't want to get involved, but we didn't have a choice, And then you can see some substantial American capability. So I think it's too early to make a judgment as to which way this is going to go, but it could have a significant impact either way.
Benjamin, from a European perspective, when you take a step back, there are a lot of conversations happening at the moment about European-China trade, U.S.-China trade, who's the better partner, and how to, in fact, regulate the amount of Chinese goods that get into Europe. When you think about this from a strategic perspective, in your mind, where are we with China as a strategic threat? And I'm talking about in their support for Russia and other governments that make the West uncomfortable.
You know, getting back to Iran for a second, I'll talk about China. What's interesting is there's been a debate sometimes over the last couple of years over whether what was happening in Ukraine was only a local conflict, a territorial conflict. And what's interesting about this is that it's clearly not the way the allies of Russia are treating this. When you see Iranian drones and missiles, when you see North Korean troops on the European continent, the change in mindset that represents, and the Chinese support, we can see that this is about much more. This is clearly an assault on the European security architecture and a threat to all of Europe. And you can see that through Ukraine, Russia is intending to attack the European security architecture and redraw the borders of Europe. And you can see that it has a much more, not only regional, but global dimension. This is not a local war. And so clearly, Ukrainians represent the first line of defense for Europeans and for democracies against the aggression of Russia. All the more reason to support them in their defense and our defense. When it comes to China, you know, a few years ago there was a document, I think, by the European Commission that summed it up pretty well. That said that our relation with China is multifaceted, where you had, you know, of course, a partner on some global and multilateral issues like tackling climate change. You had an economic competitor. You also had a systemic rivalry when it came to different forms of governance. And I think it's a partner with whom we engage, and at the same time we defend our interests. You know, just a few months ago, Europeans for the first time imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles because we could see that this was a sector that was heavily subsidized by the Chinese government after an inquiry by the European Commission. And so here you have a necessity to engage and at the same time defend our interest in a very robust and united way. But adding to this, U.S. trade tariffs and the completely illegitimate trade pressure that Europeans are facing from the U.S. administration is clearly not helping in keeping, I think, a united transatlantic front. And so here again, Europeans will have to defend their interest in a very robust way.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation to be in at a time when we're trying to help Ukraine. Madam Secretary and Foreign Minister, when you think about the security architecture of Europe, beyond what Europe needs to defend itself, we've already seen Renault coming out to say that they're going to be building drones potentially in Ukraine. In your mind, what should European partners be trying to do in Ukraine today, not just to rebuild their economy, but also to fund their war machine?
Thank you very much. Just to briefly pick up where Minister Haddad left it, I think it's extremely important indeed to underline the global implication of what's happening in Ukraine. And as a neighbor, as a country in the Black Sea region, we see in our region for the first time, I would say, actors that we have not seen before, or engaged in a level that we have not seen before. And indeed, on the Romanian territory, we had drones and pieces of drones made in Iran falling. And we see the support of other actors for Russia. And we discuss sometimes, is this a real alliance of these countries or just a convenience cooperation? But I think no matter the answer, it isn't less dangerous, and we should be treating it as such. There are global implications, and we can already see that things that used to be taboo at international level are not so anymore, and we see the impact in the Middle East, but we also see the impact in the Indo-Pacific with the DPRK and the Korean Peninsula and so on. So I think it's extremely important to have this in mind when we discuss about what's really at stake in Ukraine. In terms of what we can do to help Ukraine, indeed we need to help Ukraine keep its position on the battlefield and reject the Russian aggression, come to the negotiation table on its own terms and from a position of strength. This has been mentioned before, and also put Ukraine in the position to refuse a bad deal, because a bad deal would not be peace, would be an invitation to further aggression. And I think that this is something that we are all interested in, making sure that the peace that we are hopefully going to achieve is going to be sustainable on the long term, comprehensive, and deter further Russian aggression against Ukraine, but also against any of us. As Romania, we have helped Ukraine, of course, from the first day of the war, and we were trying hard to look at it in a comprehensive manner. We invested a lot in cross-border infrastructure, helping Ukraine with the export of its grain, keeping the state viable from an economic point of view. I think it's extremely important to continue to look at all these aspects in a comprehensive manner. And also, Ukraine has started reconstruction. We do not need to wait for the end of the war, and we definitely do not need to push Ukraine or the region to the periphery of connectivity map, for example, because there is great potential, and in order to have a sustainable peace, all these aspects need to be addressed at the same time.
Your Excellency.
Speaking of supporting Ukraine, I think all our understanding and the reality has shifted in the last 2 years from we have to help Ukraine, and from Ukraine, please help us, to true cooperation. And it's in our interest that we cooperate with Ukraine on our security. Because now Ukraine possesses some of the state-of-the-art technologies, which possibly we want to have them too. So the only way to be part of that is to be doing things in Ukraine and doing things with Ukrainians. And Ukraine is not that country which capital will be defeated in 3 days, but it's a strategic partner in building up European security. And this is the understanding to which everything is moving right now. Mm-hmm. So it's in our interest that Ukraine is on our side, and that we craft this strategic partnership, and that we will integrate with Ukraine in so many fields. And this is novelty. This was not there 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, but this is the trend of the last year. And we can follow different kind of industries or policies where this is really active and present, and this is also active policy of Czechia when doing things with the Ukrainian side, and we are very grateful for that. So you have the dedication, you have our support, and all together we can defeat Russia and keep borders where the borders should be.
May I add? It is important to help Ukraine to become more self-sufficient. We have all capacities to, for example, to produce really sophisticated, advanced weaponry in Ukraine. After or since the beginning of this full-scale aggression, we scaled up on some directions 35 times our defense industries. And we have, unfortunately, but we have such an advantage because of the war that we could test our products immediately at the battlefield. And from my humble opinion, we are true leaders in producing drones or unmanned technologies. And it will be a true contribution of Ukrainian side in a future architecture of Europe. That's not about donation now to help Ukraine. That's about future contribution in future architecture of security in Europe and transatlantic security, because Ukrainian security, European security, transatlantic security, they are indivisible. That's important to understand. We have 110 brigades with daily combat experience. With daily combat experience, approximately 1 million soldiers. So it is important to remember this and to have this perception that we are already the part of this transatlantic security and we are protecting our values. Now the border in Ukraine is the border of international law. The border of international law. And Jan, thanks a lot for your words. We do really enjoy our bilateral, mutually beneficial cooperation, especially in defense industries. And in future, we are ready to share with our closest allies, with our experience, with our technologies, in producing such types of weaponries.
Your most successful attack on Russia as a result of this weaponry that you're talking about, as a result of these drones. What is in your mind is the message then to the global military-industrial complex, which requires countries spend trillions of dollars on weapon systems that clearly you don't actually need to hit Vladimir Putin?
You're right. We proved that no safe place now in Russia, and we could approach everywhere, but if we are, of course, talking about military objects. So our signal is very simple: to support our industry or defense industry potential now by direct investments, by ordering products from Ukrainian companies. We still have not engaged potential, and we have a shortage or deficit which will allow to scale up our defense industry approximately $15 billion. It will be win-win cooperation, so we encourage private companies, state companies to look and to consider their possibility to invest now in Ukrainian defense industry. It will be really beneficial for both sides.
Benjamin, I want to bring you in on this, particularly with regards to what we've just heard from Renaud on Ukrainian drones.
I really want to reinforce what Andrii just said. Not only do we need to help Ukrainians be more self-sufficient, but it's clear that Ukrainians can help Europeans be more self-sufficient. And we just finished a negotiation a few days ago of the SAFE instruments, the 150 billion loan from the European Commission to fund defense projects in cooperation to reinforce our industrial base at the European level. And I'm really glad that Ukraine is mentioned explicitly as a partner, as a European country with whom we can develop projects, because when you look at the level of innovation and boldness that we've seen in Ukraine on the battlefield the last few years, you can see, of course, the asset that it represents for our defense industry. And reversely, the French and European weapon systems that have been used in Ukraine, of course, have improved from the situation. Look at the Caesar cannon and the way it's been used. It's been tested and improved also on the battlefield. And you know, when you look at the shifting strategic posture from the United States away from Europe, and I would say that's a trend that goes way beyond the Trump administration, with something completely bipartisan that we've seen ever since the pivot to Asia from the Obama administration. You see the questions also rising, the pressure from China, the COVID crisis that revealed also that we needed to be much more self-reliant, much more self-resilient, not just on military issues, but from energy to tech, lots of sectors where we saw our dependencies on external actors. Working with Ukrainians to bolster here the autonomy of Europeans, the European pillar of NATO, I think is clearly a mutual beneficial opportunity for Europeans, for countries like France and for Ukraine.
Do you see more companies, more French companies, doing the same as Renault in terms of investing in Ukraine?
Yes, but I think we could do more.
Yeah. Kurt, question for you. The infamous mineral deal that President Zelensky and President Trump have signed. Walk us through how Ukraine can maximize this potential.
Right. So the minerals deal is broader than minerals. It's natural resources generally, and it creates a reconstruction fund so that in the event of new licenses for resource extraction in Ukraine, money gets deposited into this fund and then is governed by a board that talks about, okay, how are we going to use these funds? The reality is that nothing will go into this fund. There will be no money at all as a result of this deal for years and years and years. So what is the purpose of this? The purpose is changing the political narrative from one of being charity for Ukraine. We're going to help those poor Ukrainians, they're being attacked, to one where Ukraine is going to pay its way. Ukraine has capability, Ukraine has resources, they're going to pay their way, so we can be partners and we can work together. This is an important change in the narrative in the United States because Donald Trump and conservative Republicans got very fired up during the Biden administration for spending taxpayer money limitlessly and having no strategy. So now they say, we've got a strategy, we've got a way that Ukraine can pay us back for this, so this is going to be okay. That's the purpose of this minerals deal. You're not going to see any money going into this until there's an end to the war and years of capitalized investment into resource issues in Ukraine in order to generate this income. So I think a lot of the reactions to this deal have been a little too breathless, and I think it does create a situation where the United States and Ukraine now can say that they're aligned, and this is actually very important. There's a question from the audience that I think is related to this, which is how can you promote investment in Ukraine while the war is still going on? And you know, Ben, I appreciate your natural hesitations that how many companies are really going to jump in right now. I think we have to actually tackle that question. Not all of Ukraine is equally dangerous. Not all industries are equally dangerous. And a lot of the things that inhibit foreign investment in Ukraine are more related to business climate than they are related just to the war. So we need to create a focus on problem solving. What are the inhibitors to economic development and investment? And there are several. There will be a Ukraine Recovery Conference next month in Rome. It'll be the fourth in a row since Russia's full-scale invasion. None of these have produced any results up to this point. And I think it's time that we try for a result. And what I would strongly urge is for Prime Minister Meloni to work with some of her G7 colleagues to agree on creating a Ukraine Economic Recovery Executive, a senior level body led by a former Prime Minister of Europe somewhere with a staff that would be focused every single day on follow-up. What needs to happen to make investments more attractive? And there are things in the insurance area, there are things in Ukraine's policies and business climate, there are blockages in the international financial institutions, there are national export credit agencies that are sitting on the ability to resource things, but they don't have the bankable project, so we need people developing that project. There are a lot of things that can be done now, and as the minister said earlier, we need to recognize that Russia's not going to change. There is likely to be a ceasefire at some point, maybe as early as this year, which I think is quite possible. We've got to be able to act quickly. We have to act faster than Putin in order to strengthen Ukraine's economy and military and help integrate them into Europe.
By the way, with your permission, this so-called mineral resources deal is also about security, because strong presence of American business is a part of future security infrastructure, and we are interested in such a strong presence of American business. And by the way, it was not an easy task to conclude this agreement, but we managed to do this.
Any steps that you are currently taking to unlock the capital that Kurt was talking about, because the capital needed for investment?
Of course, also in a framework of our path to European Union. We are trying to conduct our reforms, even despite the war. We are trying to improve our investment environment or business climate. That's true because we are interested. It is our vital interest to engage private investments, to engage huge companies, and to make it mutually beneficial.
One of the questions that was raised on the board, top international lawyers and economists essentially suggesting that seizing Russian assets is both economically feasible and legal. Now that depends, to be honest, on which lawyers you're talking to and which economists. But for the European ministers on this stage, what is holding Europe back from taking advantage of all that money that's just sitting there? Your Excellency.
It has to be a collective decision in the case of the EU countries, and since we are not able to achieve it, I'm glad that we at least have this usage of those revenues from those assets. But yes, to me it is absurd that we are sitting on a huge pile of money which belongs to the state, which acts in terms of sabotage, information manipulations, and cyber attacks against us, and wages a direct war against our strategic partner Ukraine. And at the same time, we have to tax people to generate resources to up our defenses. So yes, I would, if I had the power, I would move more decisively on that.
Benjamin, in your mind, what's the lack of political courage? Where does that come from?
No, as you know, there's no consensus on this issue, at least on seizing the underlying asset at this stage in Europe. And some countries are very exposed economically, like Belgium, and there's no legal consensus at this stage either. However, we are using them. We are using them. The windfall profits, as you know, are the collateral to the era loan. It's 50 billion euros that we use at the G7 level to support Ukraine, both on its economic needs and on its military acquisitions. And it's important that we keep them. That we keep them. You know, it's also a tool of leverage that we have over Russia.
Madam Secretary.
I would say that, of course, as Europeans, as democratic nations, we have a different way of doing business. And our strengths sometimes may be our vulnerabilities. I mean, we need consensus. We look for sound legal basis. We want to make sure that we understand the implications. And of course, the European member states look at this from different angles, and again, look for also at the legal background. Something that in Moscow, I mean, this kind of worries are never, taken into account. So again, our strengths can be sometimes vulnerabilities for us, but I think that the good thing is that the process is ongoing, and again, we've started working on this in terms of using the revenues, and the discussion continues to see how we can do more on this file as well.
Minister Sybiha, I want to ask you, 3 years ago at the World Economic Forum, 2.5 years ago, I should say, I asked your predecessor, Dmytro Kuleba, a question, which was, Henry Kissinger has said, in order to get a win or to end this war, essentially, Russia's going to have to get something that it feels stabilizes the situation, or a win, if you will. In your mind, is the defeat of Vladimir Putin essential, the defeat of Russia essential for peace? And what does that look like?
You see, I do not believe in any miracles after 3 years of Russian aggression. So we need to achieve just and comprehensive peace by concrete actions, to start to act appropriately to the situation, appropriately to the threats. According to our intelligence, Russia started to prepare strategic reserves. It means that their thinking is not only about combat operations or offensive operations only in Ukraine. That's not true. So that's a global threat. And we need to mobilize. We need full diplomatic mobilization to stop this war. It's not about the Ukraine. And this person, which you mentioned, he understands only strengths. Only strengths. Putin understands only strengths, and that's why it is so crucial and right moment to apply sanctions, to use this instrument as an economical weaponry, to approach them, to pressure them, to force them. They already, unfortunately, broken the isolation, and for him it is important. We must force them to return deported children. Thousands of Ukrainian children are in Russia, and maybe it's a proper time to start once again the process of the recognizing Russia as a terrorist state. Their response on our peace proposals, their response on our collective peace efforts, escalation and terror. 2 days ago, I visited Kherson, 13 kilometers to the front line. You see, children there, they are studying in shelters, bomb shelters. But they have happy eyes. And they have the only one dream. They want peace, and they deserve to have peace. So let's look not on what Putin wants, but what we can do now to force him to peace.
Ukraine has said that Russia has lost 1 million people so far, 1 million citizens so far in this conflict. We've discussed
He is a mass murder of his own people.
We've discussed, in fact, how much longer you believe the war can continue. You're hoping for peace by the end of the year. Kurt suggests at least a ceasefire before the end of the year. Beyond that, how long can Ukraine continue? Because 1 million people to him is not the same as 1 million to you.
We do not have another alternative. That's the existential war against us, against our people. So, of course, we want to end this war this year. Yes, people are tired, but we are ready to resist. We are ready to resist, and people support the approach of President Zelensky. We will never accept peace at any cost. We will never accept.
Your Excellencies, Madam Secretary, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to mention, everybody keep your seats because we're going to be discussing Taiwan just coming up next, so stay where you are.